2 months ago, a post on r/internet mysteries, the sleeping girl of horselaugh.com was posted, a small-scale investigation of a website known as horselaugh.com. Horselaugh.com is a pretty simple web server website, and of course it was last updated December 4th, 2024. And of course a lot of information was removed. Initially, this archive wasn't entirely something shocking to people, and it looked like something that was hosted over 15 years ago by some random account. Until of course people had went into the Wayback Machine and started to look up captures of before this server was modified. And they came across postings from 2023 of a girl being recorded as she slept. Now, rightfully speaking, the internet obviously was a little bit shocked by this and decided to look even deeper. On r/weird websites, one person posted, "Has anyone ever heard of this website called horselaugh.com? It's a weird website. If you figure anything out, please let me know." And of course, one user comes in going, "Me checking out the HTML files, yeah, this looks like some boring personal server type shit from 15 years ago. Then seeing the video footage of the girl sleeping, like what the fuck? I googled the name of the files from the videos and thankfully they seem to be related to this." And of course, their link is to the Museum of the Moving Image, ghost hunting, poltergeists. Now, I don't know if that's entirely the case, but it was an interesting situation, enough for me to actually look into it as well. And it wasn't just me looking into it, there are a few other investigators on the internet that decided to also peek into this as well. Now, going back to the Reddit post, one of the individuals, the initial person, Drunk Priesthood, writes, "The website is very strange. If you go to the vacation page, you think the website is just a poorly maintained personal site for a family. Our family's great vacation started on the morning of July 19, 2007. Dan and I had talked about wanting to go west to California for the last 2 years. But for some reason, there had always been delays. This year, however, all the pieces fit together. And of course, this immediately looks like people just sharing their blogs, a family blog. Of course, the images aren't necessarily accessible, but it really was a family sharing their travel plans. The name's Dan is very important to remember in this situation, as that'll become pretty prominent as we investigate this further. Now, in the parent directory, one important information also came out too, ASD_index. This talks about autistic children who are started on an antibiotic regimen of whatever sort report marked improvements in language, behavior, and cognizance. In most cases, those subjects revert to former behavior within 2 weeks of stopping the antibiotic. Prior to Marshall's discovery, adult ulcer sufferers simply drank milk and ate strawberries. Strawberries and milk and cheeses have long been used to alleviate symptoms of ulcers. Also have to pretty much preface, anything medical I read is not supported by us. I'm not a doctor. Please check with your actual doctors or medical professionals about anything you read on the internet. All the adult ulcer sufferers tested for allergens were positive for wheat and corn. After those adult sufferers were made aware of Marshall's discovery, all of those treated lost their allergies to wheat and corn within 1 year. Sometimes within 2 weeks, some up to 1 year, but 100% were allergen-free within 1 year. So of course the current status that they discuss is the rate of children developing ASD is 1 per 91. In 1996, that was 1 in 1918. The estimated number of the population currently positive for H. pylori is 1 in 31. The rate of children of engineers developing ASD is 1 per 55. The number one occupation for ulcers is engineers. So they were trying to causally link the ASD with this one infection that they mentioned called H. pylori. Now, this whole connection is for a medical board to decide, but it led people to really think those images and videos of a child being recorded as they slept were possibly in relation to this person's weird experimentation with ASD. But lo and behold, the scariest part of this entire rabbit hole was the folder 1417BR orbs. Now, of course, this folder contains numerous files, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35.mp4, and then a gap, 43 MP4 and 49.mp4, implying that every single file uploaded here is not exactly in order and there are some clips completely missing. Now, I decided to download each one of these clips, put them into a video editor chronologically based on a time code presented at the bottom right of this video, showing that they were filmed in 2023. specifically on the 2nd of March in 2023 towards midnight. In these videos, a child is sleeping in a pretty empty room, staring at the camera. There are some orbs floating around, but it's nothing more than just, I would assume, video artifacting. If it's one thing to notice about the actual windows, it seems that there is something boarded up here. There are some outlets properly not furnished, and aside from one bed in this area, it really doesn't seem like there's much in the terms of furniture. It seems quite odd for a children's bedroom. At some point, an individual also peeks into the room as well, and there are some things stated. There are some words being said, but it's a little tough to make out. Eventually, the lights outside in the hallway appear to be closed, and the door is eventually shut, leaving this video ending on a note of this child sleeping just shortly before midnight. Why would a server that has existed for years at this point suddenly have videos uploaded in 2023 of a child sleeping? Now, in the most charitable example, I would personally say this may be an adult performing a sleep experiment on their child, basically just recording and seeing if there's some aberrant behavior happening. But of course, people started to look further into this, connect it with the earlier ASD document that we saw, and started to look deeper into who was running this website. Now, one thing you can do with any website is, if you're lucky, you can do a whois lookup to see who really owns a certain domain. And of course, people dropped horselaugh.com into a whois just to see who was actually running it. And it came out to Dan, who is apparently based out of Pittsburgh. Now, I'm not going to go too further into it because I don't want to be doxing an individual entirely here, especially when it comes to their emails and, private numbers. But yeah, this is not something that's hidden. This is for publicly accessible archive one can dig up of who owns this website. Now, if you haven't seen Eric's video from Scare Theater, he actually did get in touch by email with Dan, whose last name appears to be Judd in this situation. He actually ended up even calling the guy. Unfortunately, because he lives in a state that is two-party consent, he wasn't able to actually capture anything. But he did receive an odd email, one that actually is pretty chilling for anybody researching this. So when he sent an email out to Dan actually responded, "My server does not allow outgoing email to Gmail at all." So I switched over to a Gmail account to continue this. My response to your last email was, "I don't know who you are, so I am not interested in speaking with you until I do." So one thing is one thing, but of course the last section of this email was actually quite chilling. So it is shocking. We've seen videos of a child being recorded as they sleep, and then the webmaster behind this allegedly is writing emails as cryptic and odd as this.
Now, Judd's online history of running websites is a rabbit hole in of itself. There are, for example, websites that if you start looking up connected domains and throwing them into the Wayback Machine, this, for example, is a website where he goes on a tear talking about a water cooler company by the name of Oasis. And it was such a massive blunder on the part of Judd with, this company that they ended up actually taking him to court for defamation. And again, this is just, it's kind of a pattern of history to show you how this person acts on the internet. And the more you look into this, the more you realize that there is definitely a level of possible mental illness at play and just general unhingedness, if you will.
Now, in this moment in time, Redditors had decided to look deeper into the whois searches for Dan and found that he had plenty of other websites. One of them was Dan A. Judd. The other one was OKLDS.com, the Oklahoma Latter-day Saints, so religious-oriented. And of course, there were other religious websites like OKC Bible, obviously the Oklahoma City Bible.com, alongside boycott-m.com. So this person ran a whole bunch of these actual pages. But importantly, one had to look into OKLDS.com to understand more about who this Dan character really was. So if you go to OKLDS right now, obviously it says there is nothing found. But if you learn anything from this video, you go to the Wayback Machine and you end up actually dropping this in and researching from here. Another one of the domains involved in the story was okids.com, which led to an interesting page or an interesting directory known as 116 pages. Now, going to something like Autism Notes meant that I had to have authorization on their page. Now, unfortunately, as this is a Wayback Machine archive and these files have not been cached, and since this is not a live server, there was no way for me to actually access okids.com and actually breach the server and see what was actually going on. Not that I would do anything of the sort, because obviously that would be breaking the law, But yeah, the server is completely inaccessible, and it's a common theme when trying to access certain parts of these websites. There is just a dead end that you hit. Now, the 116 pages was an interesting showcase and a deeper dive into who this Dan character was and what they started to believe. Now, according to Scare Theater's investigation, when he jumped into it, he actually talked, from what I believe, to a family member who actually described how this person had actually adopted the teachings of Mormonism. Now, for anybody that doesn't know what the Mormon religion is, it is a religion that is basically branched off of Christianity. So according to the core beliefs of Mormonism, the prominent feature is a Book of Mormon, a 19th century text which describes itself as a chronicle of early indigenous people in America and their dealings with God. Mormon theology includes mainstream Christian beliefs with modifications stemming from beliefs in revelations to Smith and other religious leaders. So the religious leader in this case was one known as Joseph Smith, who is effectively kind of like the father or the person that sort of kickstarted the Mormon faith. But the important part about it is the lost 116 pages, which was the original manuscript that Joseph Smith had actually translated from something known as the Book of Lehi, or the first 116 pages. Now, the story here is that in the Mormon faith, an actual angel in 1827 came up to our buddy Joseph and gave him golden plates, which he then copied and transcribed. And of course, at some point, this was lost by Smith's scribe, Martin Harris, during the summer of 1828, and are presumed to actually be destroyed. So again, to complete the Book of Mormon without retranslating the Book of Lehi, basically Joseph Smith had replaced it with an abridged version taken from the plates of Nephi. Now, of course, I'm going to leave religion up to you guys to believe or not. Again, I'm not here to discount somebody's faith. They can easily discount my faith, and again, we would just enter into a pissing match. That said, the Mormon Church was clearly integral to our buddy Dan. And of course, Dan started showing up on other parts of the internet and other discussion groups. Now, Dan is related to another individual here known as Alan, and Alan was related into one post from February 2019, where an individual, Kids, had actually discussed, in August 2013, my son Alan had been invited to a church by Abby, a girl from his school, and he asked if we could go Wednesday night. And this is kind of the, again, beginning point of when this person had jumped into the, again, Mormon religion. So, of course, Alan has some choice words to say about this as well, so I highly recommend you check out Scare Theater, as he actually did interview Alan in his video. Now, when it came to this person's ownership, they claimed to actually be somebody that held on to these original pages, which, of course, anybody in the Mormon religion is going to tell you just have not been found. They don't exist. They're not there. So when somebody claims to actually have access to these pages, people in the Mormon religion who are more skeptical of this claim are going to rightfully look into it. So obviously, when somebody was pressed to ask them, hey, do you have any information about this? He's like, no, not on that. I refuse to release that in any format. 2 reasons. First, what if it's wrong? I'm not going to be the one who spreads false doctrine based on documents which have not been proven to be scripture. Second, if it's real, I'm not going to have any of that foil hat crowd transcribing those sheets and publishing their own Book of Lehi. So again, this person claims to have something, and then of course they won't share when asked. So again, usually when that happens, I'll be honest and I'll say it right now, they probably don't have what they're claiming to have. Now, of course, the situation starts to get even wilder. Now that people realize who this Dan Judd character is, they start to look into other relations and other Reddits that also cover some serious, Mormon-related situations. So one of them is r/Lori Vallow. So the Vallow-Daybell Doomsday Murders are a series of killings, including, again, the murder of children, unfortunately, and spousal murder. But a general idea over here is Lori Vallow-Daybell and Chad Daybell, who led a Mormon religious group described by the journalists as a doomsday cult. The case was set in motion when Lori's daughter, Tylee, and younger adopted son, Joshua, respectively had disappeared respectively on September 9th and 23rd of 2019, and their remains were found in Rexburg, Idaho. On June 9, 2020, they'd been buried on property belonging to Chad, who was Lori's lover at the time of their deaths and had become her husband by the time their bodies were found. The case also involved the killings of Lori's previous husbands, Charles Vallow, and of Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, as well as the attempted murder of Lori's nephew-in-law, Brandon Boudreaux. Lori's brother, Alex Cox, who is believed by authorities to have participated in the crimes, died before he could be brought to justice. So it's a pretty massive tragedy, but Dan started to show up as well into this scenario too. So, in this one post where they actually talked about the situation, Dan was invited by Mike and Nancy James, preparing a people, to speak at a camp in Morgan. This appears to be the first time he interacted with this group and shared about his 116 pages. He and his wife attended the weekend of the eclipse, August 21st, 2017. Shell McDermott either got her info about Dan from the camp itself or from someone who attended the camp, and her announcement corresponds with the camp date. Why is this significant? Because Dan claims he met Chad, Tammy, Lori, and Tylee that weekend. He remembers Tylee well because she asked for his autograph after he gave his talk. This is a year before Lori was supposed to know Chad. And this wasn't the only place that Dan was mentioned. Even on r/x Mormon as of 3 months ago, one user even talked about Dan Judd claiming to have inherited these 116 pages years ago, putting them into a safe deposit box where they were held for decades, and then apparently giving them to the church. So even if there was something to the claim, we'd likely never see them deep in the vaults, but according to this user, it's probably more of a bullshit story. Now, even according to one of these Redditors over here, one of the things they looked into, and they brought up that Dan had cut his relation with Chad and Lori based on, again, differences in, keeping and beliefs regarding to those 116 pages, right? I believe that at some point Chad wanted to get closer access to these, and Dan was just not willing to budge. But given this odd connection in the story, and again, there is nothing here that is designed to implicate or accuse that Dan had anything to do with these murders whatsoever. Unfortunately, a connection like this is not something any investigator can reasonably ignore. And it makes those videos that we saw earlier just a lot more concerning, right? Why is this connection existing, and why were those videos on a server like that to begin with? Obviously, the people involved in the story, when you really add it up chronologically, it makes you wonder if Dan, who apparently should be in his 60s according to some of the investigators, based on the time these servers were running, and the person in the video doesn't appear to be in their 60s. In fact, these videos were captured in 2023. Makes you wonder what the connection really is. Why is it that on this server, somewhere down the road, there is a connection with investigating autism, and then videos of these children or this one child being recorded sleeping, and then, of course, the connection to Mormon extremism and the claim of ownership of 116 pages? This is quite possibly one of the more confusing and rather disturbing rabbit holes that I've seen in quite a long time. And unfortunately, because of the odd nature of it, there's no real conclusion to this situation. However, Eric's video does end on a weird conclusion as I was investigating this myself.
Back in 2019, he kicked me out whenever I was 18, which would have been back in 2016, 2015. So I don't know too much about that. I do know this. I remember hearing Chad Daybell's name come out of his mouth at one point. I know that he has specifically tried to distance himself from those murders and everything. I also know that it is right up his alley. I do not have any evidence of any kind to claim or support the fact that he actually had anything to do with it. So
now, obviously, that's a pretty wild thing to be saying, and I don't think you should ever make a claim or even insinuate or talk about that unless you have some serious hardcore proof. But looking into this whole story, it's an unresolved situation of somebody with, again, I believe to be severe mental issues. Again, when religion is involved in such a way like this, and of course when people get too, again, I'm not here to knock people who are religious. Religion can be beautiful, but of course when you take it to an extreme zenith, it does become a bit wild and dangerous. So there are a lot of unresolved situations in this case. It is good to know that the girl in this situation is not primarily taken care of by Dan or whoever is this one person being brought up. But I think it does bring a serious question. How do these videos end up online, and what is the purpose for it? Again, the most charitable example I gave earlier in the beginning of this video was that maybe it could just be a sleep study being recorded. But the actual room is very concerning. It appears to be boarded shut, very, very plain and empty, especially for a children's bedroom. It just doesn't feel right. And I think anybody at first glance looking into this can have a bit of a worry for it. But again, ladies and gentlemen, it's just another weird website on the internet that really did spark up my interest, as many other investigators did. Now, do I think this is some crazy story to be going down into? Probably not. And even if you do want to go down into it, a lot of the information that was up on the internet is slowly being taken down. Whoever is behind this is very active in manipulating their website. And hopefully there is nothing really bad going on in this situation, but it is rather odd, and it's a weird part of the internet that had me so enamored that I wanted to share it with you guys. But ultimately, the end of all this, like any of these stories, I always highly tell you to never go down these rabbit holes yourself, never engage with anybody that you have seen in these stories, and I do not condone any form of harassment going on over here.
Now, the thing is, this is obviously a story that has a lot of threads that we went down. The autism and the explanation and connection to, again, stomach ulcers, the connection again to Dan, who was the alleged webmaster of the service, and then being connected to social media profiles showing that, again, this person went into Mormonism and it got pretty serious. And of course, the actual, accounts of people related to the situation, it's a confusing mess to go down. And I don't feel it would have been as crazy if it had not been for these, surveillance style photos of, again, somebody just sleeping, right? It is just one of those things that are weird, right? You kind of wonder, maybe is this the religion that's also affecting how they're treating people for possible neurodivergency, things like autism? Maybe, it could be as charitable as that sleep study explanation that I gave. But yeah, it is an unfortunately weird thread to go down into, and all I can really hope for is a safety. But the reality is, this is one of many websites that, when I cover things like the dark web and I come across interesting, places on the internet, this is but one of many places that I come across where, again, these websites contain rather weird accounts. Sometimes there are fragments and historical archives of weird shit on the internet, and this is just one example. But yeah, Horselaugh is a website that you probably shouldn't go to, you probably shouldn't engage with, and the person behind it doesn't exactly seem to have a full deck of cards in play. But, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I can really say on this matter. It is one of the internet's weirdest rabbit holes to go down into. Well, I shouldn't say weirdest. There's stuff like LHOHQ, and of course there's, even weirder things out there. But this ranks amongst them. There's a lot of unresolved situations to be discussing, a lot of unresolved threads that hopefully make more sense as time goes on.
If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.